We have Dean just about ready, getting his coffee ready. And we're going to have a very active and lively panel talking about copper broadband. Is it dead in the age of fiber? And how can technology solutions allow a multi-gigabit broadband marriage of fiber and copper broadband? Wow. Dean, take it from here.
Thank you. I was very surprised when I got asked to moderate a panel session on copper. I'm primarily a wireless analyst, and I do some stuff on fiber as well. So when I got a request to, can I moderate a panel on is copper broadband dead? That was a bit of a surprise to me, especially because it involved a discussion about a whole set of standards that I'd never heard of before. Apologies if some of my questions today are slightly basic, but I found the whole morning so far is very educational. So I now know an awful lot more than I did 3 hours ago, and hopefully in 45 minutes I'll know even more about the variations of ways of delivering broadband over coaxial, power line, twisted pair, and so on. So we've got a lineup of 4 panelists. 2 you've already heard from this morning. So you're familiar, hopefully, with Paul and Helge, assuming you're in this room rather than next door. And we have 2 additions. And so what I'll do is, just in case there were people here who weren't here earlier, I will ask Paul and Helge to just sort of say like 10 seconds each on who they are and what they do. But then I'll ask Livia and Marcos to give a bit more of an introduction to what they do and what their organizations do. So I'll start from this end. So Paul, if you could just give a very, very quick hello.
Hello.
Remind people who you are and
seconds. So I have a whole long background in DSL. I'm currently in the fiber product management team and looking at fiber solutions and fiber extensions, such as MoCA and Fast.
And my name is Helge Tiainen. I'm a business development manager at InCoax. InCoax is a Swedish company, been in this field of reusing the buildings, coax networks for high speed. So I've been in this for 14 years, and I'm also in a number of editor roles here in BBF. One which is of interest for you, which is fixed wireless access extension, where we use copper.
Excellent, thank you. Livia.
Thank you, sir. I am a low-frequency voice person. It's helped really. Mics really helps. Many thanks, Dean, for welcoming us here. Many thanks, everyone, for joining the panel discussion. Much appreciated. Many of you know me. I have several hats in the industry. I do represent today, for the sake of the roundtable, the HomeGrid Forum community, the GHN Alliance. I have been supporting service providers' deployments over many years, too many, maybe, in different countries, different topologies, globally, US, Asia, Europe, of course, and have been a great advocate for the combination of the beauty of the different technologies, segmenting the networks in a way that does help acceleration of the rollouts rather than competing technologies. So great advocate of that. Also collaborating and participating greatly in the Purple Foundation, as you know, and using the beauty of these different frameworks for addressing today the deployments.
Thanks. A quick follow-up on that, Livia. What is it precisely that HomeGrid does? Because that was the first mention of the term we've had this morning so far.
Great question, Dean. HomeGrid Forum is, to put it short, the GHN Technology Alliance of service providers, SoC vendors, system vendors, ODMs, OEMs, and all that do participate on building the rollouts on the foundation of the ITU-T GHN standard that is very nicely presented on the ITU-T side, all the progress. So we build on that foundation as a standard, has been certified for the first time in 2008. And the beauty of this GHN technology to start with is that, as the ITU-T mentioned here, started as a home networking technology. As many of these standards, they do get a name, they do get a label that is addressing an initial use case. And then that gets extended. So the GHN technology started with the power line and the home networking. When it got extended to the fiber extension use cases, FTTP, coax, phone line, used on as a backhaul for Wi-Fi, backhaul for Li-Fi, frequency spectrum, light spectrum. So combining all this, and of course, because of that, ultimately also supporting smart grid use cases, low voltage and medium voltage for electric utilities. So at the end, not just serving the internet service providers rollouts, but also the energy service providers rollouts. Interesting puzzle of the use cases.
Thank you very much. And finally, Marcos from MoCA. Obviously, this is the MoCA roundtable. So if you'd like to introduce yourself, what your organization does, and where you fit in with all of what we've heard this morning.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for introducing topic, and thank you for BBF for organizing this session, okay, this event, which, in my opinion, well, we've seen very interesting contributions from several partners on different topics. Yes, as you'd say, I'm Marcos Martínez, president of MoCA. MoCA is a well-established brand. Okay, we are an industrial organization or industrial alliance that has been around for more than 20 years. I don't know exactly the time, okay, even before I knew about MoCA. And MoCA is an organization that the primary target when it was created was really to address the case of interconnecting set-top boxes in the houses. Okay, so there was the initial IPTV rollouts. Okay, so they say, okay, let's use the coaxial network in order to provide connectivity to the different fixed entities that are in the house. That was more than 20 years ago. In the meantime, the organization has changed, okay? And it is true that we've spent the last years also to understand what is the new landscape on what are the new needs in the home networking, and to see how this technology, okay, can be updated in order to address these new challenges. One of the new challenges that we are addressing, and that is how do we convert the strengths and the great features that MoCA has in order to solve the problems in other applications like the fiber extension. Okay, and that's where we are, and I think that's a general point from all the organizations. Okay, that we are trying, or we see less and less difference between what it is home networking and access networking. Okay, so we are moving slowly towards the access. MoCA is in there. We are presented. Well, there has been several presentations about the use of MoCA access technology. We have also MoCA mesh technology. Okay, for the pure in home, for mainly Wi-Fi backhauling. But for the access, the fiber extension, fixed wireless extension, we use MoCA access.
So when you say fiber extension, that's for the essentially taking the existing footprint of a fiber network owner into places where they either can't or it's not possible to sort of install fiber to the endpoint.
Well, we've seen examples, isn't it, during the last 2 days? Okay, and it's worth to mention some of the presentations that were done yesterday when you compute or you calculate the fiber rollout, you count the fiber to the building, okay, for instance. Okay, so we are trying to address all these cases, okay, the cases where you have fiber to the building and then you need to extend that, okay, or because you already decide that you will do a fiber to the building. We also try to address the cases where service providers, for instance, says, okay, will roll out the fiber to the home deployment, but in some specific cases, it's much more interesting economically to complement the fiber with some meters of coaxial, okay? But we are also trying to address some other use cases like the one Helge presented, where we say, okay, we have some specific case, niche applications, niche deployments like rural areas, okay, where it makes a lot of sense to use a mix of technology. At the end, we have technologies are tools that you have to combine in order to provide a solution or a service to the user. Okay, so we are not really trying to oblige the service provider to say this is the deployment model that we propose, but rather to say, okay, what are your deployment models, and we will adapt to them.
Thank you.
I think we yesterday touched down on fiber to the room as fiber to the rich. And I know when we worked with this fiber FTTEP, fiber to the extension point, it was announced unofficially that this is fiber to the economical point.
Right. So in all cases, we're talking about the installed copper. I mean, is anyone deploying new copper? Or is this all just talking about the install base? Any of you, go for it.
I can start with that. I mean, not really, but the copper is there and it will not go away. Okay. We heard also yesterday that there are some service providers that are announcing that they are closing the copper central office. It's true. Okay. We know, but the copper that is in the buildings is there. It will be there for many years, and any new building has copper. Okay. So at the end, what we, and again, I'll come back to this concept because it's very important, okay? We are not in a situation where we say, okay, you have to install this this cable here or there or whatever just for us. We will adapt to whatever it is there. But normally there is coax, okay? There is, especially in some regions.
So you know, Paul, you were highlighting the sort of battle between the standards here. Yeah, and there's the different approaches here. And obviously we've also got Powerline, which wasn't on the chart you showed there as well. Is this essentially dictated by any given building will only have a certain option or maybe two options? You know, so in fact, it's all going to be case by case. I mean, do you go into a building and say, well, you could have option 1, 2, or 3?
Yeah, and Dean, you also mentioned here Powerline technology, and that exists indeed, but it's mainly used for in-building communication, not really as an access, or at least not as a high-speed access. It's not suited for it. And well, to answer your question, whether there are options in place, I think that much depends on the building, on the region, on the country. In many cases, buildings have both coax infrastructure and twisted pair infrastructure. But what we see happening, that is the traditional telco operators, they are more familiar with the twisted pair, and they also have easy access to the twisted pair. They are more used to use the technology, and typically they have a preference if they do fiber to the building, to then, and if it's not possible to fiberize a building, to make use of the twisted pair. While cable operators, okay, it's just the opposite. They are familiar with the coax. They have typically easy access to the coax. And they have a preference in that direction. But we do see exceptions. We have telco customers who are making use of coax in buildings if it's easily accessible, for the simple reason that coax has better characteristics in terms of attenuation and insertion loss. And yeah.
Okay. Helge, then go along the line on this one.
Maybe I've been appointed some evenings as a coax guy. And I mean, I love that medium because it's something which were in the early days transporting the high-speed internet, I mean, for 20, 30 years. And now we have a project here in BBF where we are trying to educate that the mobile industry should use the coax. That's the multi-tenant fixed wireless access part, especially when you're using millimeter waves, you can't reach the apartments. And there is a coax, so why not reusing? I mean, the strength of an existing infrastructure in a building, I mean, that will be there. I mean, coax will not die. It has the same life length as fiber. So it will be there. So we have to be in this type of forums, trying to see how can we reuse this in a very efficient way. So I wouldn't say that coax is dead. It's only that we are not innovating enough with new things that we could use. And that fixed wireless access extension, that's one step in that direction.
Livia, what's your take on this? How much choice does, whether it's a building owner or a service provider, have when it comes to this sort of last meter distribution aspect?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at a building owner, he's okay. Maybe was it true?
I'd pass that along to Livia, actually.
Oh, thank you. Oh, wonderful.
You got two mic. The transmission diversity there in action, yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. Well done, sir. Thank you. Bring some disruptive beauty. Exactly. It's 8th of March. Yes, gentlemen. So that's a nice price to pay also and to be praised. In the HomeGrid Forum case, of course, service providers with the GHN technology have two microphones, the phone line and the coax, because they can use each of these mediums, and it really depends on the service provider choice, and also depends on the service provider's desired wish of partners. So the system vendors here in the room, they know that if they are on the authorized list of partners for the service providers, it's easier to get their equipment deployed. If they are not, it's more time-taking to get the validation of the devices. So that's also important. And who owns the equipment and who owns the network itself. Then, of course, each of the country has more either coax or phone line in infrastructure in place, and that can be influencing already. So you see, of course, in some countries in Europe, coax is more prevalent, and then in some others, phone line. Same you see in US and then in Asia. But the service provider ultimately is looking at what they have at their fingertips, and then looking at the throughput, and then something that is not mentioned, but it's the reliability and the quality of service. They kept saying about that. But now I'd like to shift the paradigm, and we should all talk about the quality of experience, and has been mentioned here by many speakers, because you are going to look at the throughput and measure that with the speed test only if you are frustrated as a user. Otherwise, you never use it. And it's the quality of experience at the end. The user is not looking at if it's a phone line or coax, if it's a Wi-Fi, if it's properly managed technology, and of course, GHN has the beauty of cover all of us as a backhaul. But again, I will urge the collaboration and looking at what exactly is the need of each service in order to be properly deployed. And may I keep the two mics?
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, this one as well. I've got a third, but yeah, I'm loud enough. Marcos, yeah, what's your? Are you presumably you're targeting the markets with lots of coax in buildings? Which are those? Where is the coax today?
Well, the coax is everywhere, isn't it? I mean, you can find it everywhere. It's true that there are some regions where the use of coax in the access has been there for many years. Okay, so I mean, it's obvious the presentation that we've seen. Okay, it's relatively easy to see where these kind of technologies can be used. MDUs, yeah, sure. I mean, that's something, but there are many types of MDUs. Helge presented examples of MDUs in rural areas where it is economically makes a lot of sense to do that. We were discussing even during the coffee break with some of the people saying, okay, maybe in some urban areas in the States where it is also the perfect fit for use that, or for this, and there is coaxial. But there are other places. I mean, you know that there are in Europe. There is also a lot of cable installed because of the use of other access technologies like DOCSIS, for instance. So the evolution of these kind of installations can also go towards the use of the MoCA as an extension of fiber. We were hearing a presentation yesterday also from people saying that in DOCSIS installation, the trend is to have more and more fiber, okay, and to go to higher speeds in the very last meter. That's exactly the same use case that we are investigating within MoCA and that we are demonstrating. We've also briefly mentioned evolutions of the technology. So answering your question, I think it's a little bit everywhere, but I want to stress that point that I made before. Okay, so we are a very adaptive technology. Okay, and as a very adaptive technology, we will try to address any use case where we find coax. Okay, and sometimes you find coax in places that you don't think. We have also mentioned hospitalities, for instance, hotels. You have the TV coax that will stay there. Okay, so that's the perfect place to use that. So at the end is, well, you take what you have, okay, what you find, okay, and you try to adapt the technology in order to address these use cases. Okay, so
I mean, does that mean though that there need to be sort of site surveys and tests? You know, it's like, well, what coax do we have in this building? Is it any good, or do you just assume it works?
Yeah, Helge, go on, please.
How many of you have a TV set? Hands up. How many of you have a TV set? In principle, all. You have coax.
Let's say it this way. I mean, and I completely support with what Helge says. I mean, everybody has a TV, everybody has a coax. It will be forever, and the point is that the entry point to the building may be different. Okay, you can have fiber, you can have fixed wireless access perfectly. You can enter from the roof or from the bottom. Okay, but at the end, the cabling installation is always there.
And if I may, okay, I support ideas that coax is quite universal. Twisted pair is everywhere. I think unless you have a very recent house or a very recent building where you could have maybe directly connect to the fiber, that would be the obvious thing to do. But I think all people have a fiber at home or in the building, a twisted pair at home or in the building. So this is always an option.
One of the things that I track when I look at the fiber marketplace is the rise of open access and wholesale fiber. You know, where you've got the fiber operator and then multiple retail ISPs using that infrastructure. Do all of these solutions support that sort of the multi-tenancy in terms of retail ISPs, or is it complicated because each ISP needs to have a different CPE or the same CPE, that they may not be used to? If you, I would say in the UK, you've got, say, Sky, which comes with a certain content bundle. Yeah, and I wouldn't know if I had an MDU, if I lived in an MDU with one of these solutions, would Sky be able to service all of those apartments inside it? Or is it more like the cable model, which is, cable operators generally don't do wholesale? Helge.
I'm from Sweden, and Sweden is well known for their open networks. And it's built on, it's not PON, it's active Ethernet, and you're using the double tags to address the service. So in principle, the systems we have built has always been in mind of that they need to be an open. You have a communication provider who builds the network, and then you have the service providers, and customer must be able to select. So, it's not so much depending on the media, it is depending on how you set up your business model and who is going to invest the equipment and how do you share the revenue from the service provider with you as a communication provider. Typically today in Sweden is that communication provider takes 50% of the cake and the service provider takes the other 50%. And then the service provider is only taking care of all the customer calls and problems and addressing them to the communication provider who really checks through and handle that. So open networks, yes, but usually the big problem is what is the business model?
Thank you. Livia.
I agree with Helge, and we see the same thing on the HomeGrid Forum site. Actually, you listened to a Positron presentation earlier. We have a great white paper use cases on service providers, network operators, and how the business model is being selected and how that is impacting the rollout. So I agree with Helge on that one as well.
Oh. And as I mentioned, we see both GFast and MoCA as fiber extension solutions. And just as with pure fiber deployment, an operator can decide to open up its network, its access infrastructure to other service providers. You can do the same if you extend your fiber with GFast or MoCA, and you can do that by using bitstream access or using slicing. I think both are possible. You will have very similar discussions with respect to the equipment at the end user. Is the operator offering, do you have a two-box model for fiber, for instance, where the access infrastructure provider is providing the ONT and leaves the choice of the residential gateway to service providers, or do you go for a single box? I think that's quite similar with what you could do with
Because Marcus, I'm going to come to you in a sec. Because I think this is going to be an important issue, certainly in parts of the world with quite strong competition rules. Is in theory, if you live in an MDU, you should have the same competitive choices as if you live in an SFU. Yeah, and I think that regulators and policymakers are probably going to sort of take a look at that in some markets over time. Marcos.
I was going to say that here the trick, and I fully agree with you. I mean, at the end, we cannot avoid the rules of the market, okay? And the market goes into to the direction if you are not offering something that can be flexible enough, okay? And you will not be part of the solution. So I think the trick here is that the extension technologies that are deployed in order to extend broadband access, either fixed wireless access or fiber, as I say, has to be transparent, okay, for the user, and for the user and for the service provider. That means that, I mean, just exaggerating a little bit, but it has to be seen as a cable, okay, as a pure Ethernet. So at the end, the service provider should not consider that extension as another technology, okay? It should be seen as just the same technology that is using for the access. So the tools, the management tools have to be the same. The way that you prepare network APIs, which is something that is really in the air right now, the way that you configure the quality of service, everything has to be exactly the same. So at the end, what you will have, what you will face towards the user will be an Ethernet connection, okay? What is behind that Ethernet connection has to be completely transparent for the service provider and for the user. We are trying to do that, and there are several works going on in BBF, for instance, in order to create the right data models, the right management procedures for doing that. But that's the trick, okay? And if you achieve that, then, I mean, there will be zero difference between an FTTH deployment and an FTTB deployment plus a fiber extension. If you achieve that, you can move from one operator to another very easily. Okay?
So who owns the fiber extension of whatever type? Yeah, is it the building owner? Is it the network operator? Where's the demarcation point? And what happens if something goes wrong on the building side of that?
This is, I mean, the typical question we always get. It's depending on the country, how the regulations and the laws are. I mean, if you look on the MDU building in Europe, you have, I mean, not only the coax network, the phone lines, there is also water ducts, there are electrical wires, and typically I would say it is the building owner who owns that. So if you're going to deploy a fiber into a building, then the question will be, can the building owner pay that fiber deployment? And usually they say, it's not my business, but he will own that. Then, of course, there is a lot of variations. I mean, when the cable industry built their coax networks, I mean, the cable TV networks, then they had long exclusive rights. I mean, they were maybe 30 years. Most of these exclusive rights has fallen now. So now the regulators, at least in Europe, are controlling that there is not the possibility for a cable operator to exclude somebody from this type of, as a new type of services. And there has been two laws which has been I was part in the first project of that when the new Electronic Act came, I think it's 2015 or something like that, that there should be an opportunity for other providers to use this infrastructure by that and if it's something which the operator has been paid off already, then the cost shouldn't be anything, or it should be something. But if you can't agree, then it goes to the regulator and to decide. I mean, there has been, for certain of these, twisted pair maybe it's a little bit different situation. I'm not expert on that, but coax, it's principally, at least in Europe, there is an opportunity to use those, excluding, of course, if there is an exclusive agreement. In US, it's regulated by FCC. So there you have the home run, you have the home network, and it's very well regulated that anyone else can use that, but you have to follow certain cancellation rules when you do that. Okay. And usually it says that cable operator should take away the cable, but nobody goes there and take away the cable because maybe next day the customer comes back.
Yeah. Oh.
I think we need to make a distinction between who owns the infrastructure, the twisted pair or the coax, and who owns the equipment for G-Fast or for MoCA. The experience we have with G.hn, it's very clear that it's the access provider who is typically deploying the DPU inside the building and the G-Fast CPEs, and thus who owns the DPU, while the twisted pair can be owned by the building owner. So yeah, I think we need to make that distinction.
Hey, Livia.
Speaking of a disruptive panel, I was somehow disappointed to hear you, Paul, talking about GFast, and very happy seeing the partnership with InCoax and moving towards MoCA. And I think this is a great way forward to reusing the coax infrastructure, and then, of course, when the case is for the phone line, the HomeGrid Forum, of course, advocates for the GHN event. But coming back to the question, I have been relocating 22 times in 6 countries, and my own experience as a user has always been, wherever I relocate, I look for the highest throughput, best quality of experience, and I do ask the service provider and the building owner or the homeowner, if I rent that, to actually provide the highest quality of experience connectivity-wise. And it's always the same question, and as Helge explained very well, it really depends on a case-by-case basis, varies from country to country. Who owns the building, who owns the infrastructure, as Paul mentioned, who owns the equipment, and it's always, to put it short, a mess. And who pays for that in terms of frustration and delays in connectivity is the user itself, all of us here, because we never know what's the best approach. And every time you change your home location, it's the same story, and you call service providers, I want, of course, you might start saying, I want the fiber to my home directly, FTTH. And that's the vision, and everyone wants that, and we do support that as a vision because we are experts of the industry. But in many of the cases, this is not possible. Service providers that are members of the HomeGrid Forum, they recognized that between 10% and 20% in each of the country, this is not possible, and will never be possible because of whatever reason, which were greatly explained by the speakers here, Paul, Helge, Pierre, and Les. So when this is not the case, then they need to look for alternatives. In many cases, service providers they are not fast in recognizing this is not possible. They do not provide the information to the end user. So we here as HomeGrid Forum, MoCA Alliance, supported by TUT and with the great support from Broadband Forum that we all appreciate, and collaborating for the certification efforts as well, we want to support service providers and explaining to them that they need to rely on what they have to make it faster, like so many years wasted of connectivity not being accomplished to the level of perfection that could have been properly offered by all this wide range of technologies. And it's not about comparing them anymore. I would say don't waste your time to compare technologies. You have all of them at your fingertips. It's just a matter, of course, I'm talking with the service providers now. It's just a matter of using what you have, what is best in your own location, your own country, infrastructure-wise, business model-wise, and then rely on that to accelerate the deployment.
Thank you. Marcos.
Yeah. Just to conclude a little bit on your question on who owns the infrastructure. I think it's a very important topic, and there are 1,000 answers, okay? But one thing, and everybody, as Helge said, everybody asks the same question, but I don't understand why, okay? Because that's not a real, there is no real difference or fundamental difference from what has been done in the last 30 years.
I'll give you a scenario for why people might care who owns it, because I've heard this morning quite a lot of people talk about converging the in-building wiring, for want of a better term, with Wi-Fi. And having coordination for the Wi-Fi in different apartments, even different rooms in the apartments mesh. If there's a box with active electronics in the basement that the property company owns, which has my personal data on where I am, which room I'm in, which Wi-Fi access points I'm using, what devices I'm using, and what services, then there's a big security and privacy issue. I sort of am more likely to trust a big tier one service provider if it's their box. But if it's a property company that's put it in a cupboard with a simple lock, no.
No, I agree. I mean, I was going to say there are challenges, and nowadays there are more challenges than in the past. Okay, the security and privacy, especially here in Europe, it's something that is very sensitive. I agree. What I was meaning is that, I mean, when DOCSIS was deployed, these questions were there. When DSL was deployed, these questions were there. Okay, because they were both all these technologies were already using some shared infrastructure, and every country solved it in a different way, but they solve it. So if you are going into the direction of fiber extension or broadband extension, you will have also to solve these questions, indeed. But just in the same way that you did it in the past. Now, these questions are maybe a little bit more challenging because they are new elements, yes, but that's exactly the same problems that you will face if you deploy FTTH, okay? Because if you want to do coordination, instead of doing it in the edge, you will do it in the cloud, okay? So instead of being the service provider, it can be just a service that is sold by a startup, for instance, as it happens many times. So the fundamental ownership has not changed. We have to solve that. Now there are more challenges, yes, but we will have to solve them.
Okay, I think there's a discussion we can take. There's a question from the floor there. I'll ask a name and...
Is this on? Yeah, there it is. Kevin Knoll with Cable Labs. I'm going to maybe put a slight twist on your question, Dean, and ask it this way. Does it really matter who owns that infrastructure? Because in the end, who is the customer going to call when there's a problem?
Yeah, but there's a question of who's the customer going to call and who's the lawyer going to call.
The lawyers don't get involved until after. I understand, right? I understand what you're saying from a privacy perspective.
And compliance.
In the end, who does the customer call? They don't call the lawyer first. Who do they call first?
Well, it depends if the building owner provides the broadband or not.
They provide they call the service provider. So if the building owner is the service provider, that's who they're going to call. So that's I meant it as a question, maybe for the panel to answer, but now I'm giving my opinion on it. Right?
Well, at the end, it will depend a lot on the country. I mean, I give you an example. Okay, and this is not just for fiber extension; it's also for fiber. I mean, in Spain, where I come, the demarcation point is in the basement, but there is fiber within the building. So if the fiber within the building is broken, who has to repair it? Legally, if you look to the law, the owner of the building has to do it. In reality, the customer will not expect the owner of the building to do it. The service provider will do it. Okay, so there is a gray area there, and every country has solved that gray area in a different way. So in the case of fiber extension, the same thing will happen. The only difference is that indeed there will be an active equipment, but it's an equipment. It will be owned by someone, this equipment. Okay, so.
Thank you. Paul, did you have something to say, or was that? Or shall I'm going to take another question, and we haven't got too much time, so I'll take one or two questions and then get everyone to come back on them.
Thank you. Helge asked the question, who owns a television set? I own a television set, but I don't use it as a television set. I use it as a monitor. I have an Ethernet connection to it, not a coax connection. I wonder how many people use just Ethernet connection to their TV sets these days, which leads me to the question I'm interested in is copper broadband dead in the age of fiber, but rather, is it dying in the age of fiber? I wonder, with new MDUs, whether the building is being, if they're building with coax or if they're building with fiber these days in new buildings. And I would imagine that all the service providers, including coax service providers, the cable operators would probably prefer to have fiber all the way.
Yeah, I can.
Yes,
If very brief answers, because we've got about 30 seconds and three questions.
infrastructure lasts for a very long time, so I don't see anything happening soon.
I can I can answer on that. It's depending on the country. If you take, for example, Sweden, all new builds, they are without coax. It's only Ethernet cables. There is not even fiber because sometimes it's seen that it's better to have the fiber termination in the basement because it's an Ethernet-based business. But it comes more and more fiber. Then we look in I know in Germany, Germany it doesn't change so fast. So here you have a new build, you have Ethernet cable, but you have coax also. And in US, they have forgot the Ethernet. They build coax because they think that's the way in new builds. So it's very much depending on how and where that is built. And I know we have done a lot of installations on vessels and ferries. They changed because you cannot change the cable infrastructure in the ferry because it's a security reason. So there is always coax, even if it's not used.
Thank you.
Livia, did you want to add something to that, or shall I take next?
Just briefly, that this gets to the point of the, in US you have 30% MDUs, and then that's even more in Asia and Europe, and all this needs to be served and so on. And then you need to look at the greenfield and brownfield. So the truth is that operators do easily overlook the brownfield MDUs. And again, in the HomeGrid Forum community, you'll see plenty of examples of that and use cases detailed that show you how this should be treated. But the brownfield, again, it's something that it's not easily served by the service providers, and they have to look at the cost of the operation. And at the end, this is what we're going to do. What is faster and cheaper to be deployed in order to provide the connectivity?
Thanks. Thank you. I'm just going to take the next question, and then we can probably then go along the panel. In fact, is it two questions? I'm going to take both questions, and then I'm going to get final remarks from each panelist. Otherwise, I'm going to have people kicking us all off stage. So,
yes,
go ahead.
Pierre Trudeau with Positron. So, also, fiber extension is fantastic. Fiber extension doesn't need GWHN or MoCA or GFast. It's fiber extension over something that looks like Ethernet inside the building. And it can be wired. It could be Cat6 wiring if it's available, for instance. But going back to as to who owns the network, is if you're a building owner, even if you're these large investment funds that have thousands of buildings, you're responsible to make sure that there's adequate plumbing and electricity. You're not the plumber nor the electrician. If there's an issue, you call the plumber. It's the same thing with service providers. But for service providers to be able to provide that connectivity inside the building, you have to decide who onboards the customer. There have been some attempts to turn MDUs like hotels, where here in a hotel, when you sign up, you say, my room number is this, my last name is this, you connect. But it stays here inside the hotel.
If you get to a question, please.
Yeah, so in that MDU model, can we have the MDU operate as if it was a hotel, so like a traditional hotspot, or does the relationship with the end user belong to the service provider?
So yeah, that comes down to is the property the broadband the service provider, or does the tenant get a choice of normal service provider brands? I'll come back. Hold your thoughts on that. I'll take one last question, and then I'm going to get a quick comment from all the panelists before we wrap up.
Yeah, this is Joe from Sparnex. The way how we look at this is we split up in access network and distribution network. What you're talking about is about distribution, because the access is already in front of the door with the fiber. The fact that you come with fiber, you push then everybody in that building to do something to connect to the fiber. So this way you are affected, but because in most of the regulators are asking to free the box, to make the box that is inside the home as something that can be a choice of the people who owns the home and who lives in the home. So if you now come and you push the people to do something, if you split it in private ownership and an access network, then probably a solution might be much faster for you to answer the question. I don't know what your opinion is.
Yep, thank you. Right, I'm going to go along the panel, this time from Marcos down towards Paul, and please keep the responses, final responses, to like ideally about 20 seconds before I get kicked off.
Yeah, very fast. And your first answering Pierre and Joe. Okay, so I think that I mean, at the end, as I say before, I mean, what we need to do is to create technologies that mimic Ethernet cables, and I fully agree with Pierre. Okay, we don't want to make the user nor the service provider to do something different. They will, and also the second point is that we need to do technologies that are also flexible enough to adapt to any specific regulation or a specificity of a particular deployment or a particular country. If you do that, there will be challenges. Lawyers will be in the middle, okay, from service providers, but they are solvable. Okay, that's the idea, and that's where we are working in MoCA. Okay, in order to address all the possible use cases, starting from the high level, and try to see what are the features that we need to incorporate in our technologies to allow all these things. Okay, 20 seconds.
Thank you. Generous.
Very quickly, the same way you look at the OMCI provisioning, same way you need that for the marriage with the PON and the fiber extension on coax. For the Wi-Fi management as well in the building. All these different features have been overlooked in the past too. I've seen service providers also trying to choose whether it's only, same for the MDU provisioning, whether it's just wired or just Wi-Fi. They spend lots of years on Wi-Fi only until they realize they need a backbone technology for that, a wired, to support the quality of experience. So at the end, the provisioning and the way the features are embedded, it comes into force. I'll leave it here.
And those cases, I mean, during the 14 years, we've seen that the MDU owners are becoming an operator. Those cases are usually very short because they don't understand that this is a 24-hour business. So these dies rapidly.
Yeah. And okay, I think I share that view from a technology point of view. Both are possible, both models are possible. By the way, we don't promote the market to install copper or fiber in new buildings. What we are trying to do here is solve an existing problem of an unserved part of the market, and there you can reuse existing infrastructure. But I do believe that in most cases it will be the access provider who deploys the equipment, who delivers the service, guarantees the service, and that you can call the access provider in case there is a trouble with your connection.
Thank you very much, and thank you all to the panel. To all of the panel, please show your appreciation and give a round of applause. Thank you.
There, just for a second, please, if you can turn the microphone on. Thanks. You are my model for setting up the camera here.
All right.
Great one. And that was a model panel, I might say, too. It was very instructive. In fact, this whole morning was one of the things that I got out of it. And it's something, you hear a message over and over and over again, and it still doesn't hit you, but it finally did. And this is the whole idea of digital divide in brownfields, right in the middle of the city where there's tons of fiber potentially, and yet you have these buildings that are unserved.
Sometimes called digital deserts. I live in one because I live in like an alleyway, off an alleyway, and no one puts fiber there.
Are you actually in the alleyway, or?
Yeah.
Okay, you have a
tent. Yeah.
Okay.
But it's there are these little pockets that are very difficult. In London, you have these little streets with old cobblestones, and no one wants to dig them up, and the council doesn't want to have aerial fiber. There's all sorts of challenges. One other thing that panel brought home to me is we talk about shared infrastructure a lot. This is another class of shared infrastructure, and I don't think that policymakers are paying attention to this, just as they don't to a bunch of the other stuff around things like neutral host wireless. One of the reasons I asked about the security model is the UK has the 4 mobile operators have a group that's defined shared in-building infrastructure rules and policies, and 2/3 of the specification is the security model.
Interesting. Wow, that's food for thought for the next panel that we have on this topic sometime. But now we're going to shift. We're going to shift to the cloud part of the day. And again, a big hand for everyone. Oh, everyone. Yep.